This is Cuban National Library, a sanctuary for writers like Reynaldo Gonzalez. This institution safeguards Cuban literature, original documents, and historic papers that show what has happened in the last century. This is where Reynaldo comes to find a part of the truth necessary for telling stories. He considers that he's still on a battle to enlighten people about recent cultural history of Cuba. What this library means to you? What did you want to do this interview here?
As I told you, I came every day and I worked here for 8 hours as an employee and researched. And so I learned so much by reading old newspapers where life is, and also private correspondence between the persons I want to study, the circle of Montino. And Villaverde was part of that, and he was also my objective. But Villaverde didn't write that. He wrote novels and published them, but he not news. He wasn't a journalist as such.
So, Reynaldo, this is like a sanctuary for people who studies and people who research about history and the present of Cuba. But yourself, you have a very interesting story, Reynaldo. You've done a lot of things, and you were born in a very poor family. You cleaned floors, you sold orange. You did so many things to survive. How come you became a writer, an editor?
I think you can be born a writer and also make yourself a one. I was born to a poor family whose head was a widow with 3 children, but she was also so demanding. You'll begin working at 14, she said. You'll work half a day and then other half will be for school. She used to say a very nice thing: you've got to make yourself a person. I mean, we were poor but proud, and we wanted to be persons, you see? So I was a little boy with curls. We sold lottery tickets. That kid will bring me luck because of the curls and rosy cheeks, and so on. And we were 3 doing that. That's how we grew. We began working at 14. I gradually began working in notary offices and in a bank. When the revolution won, I was working at the bank opened by Batista, the Agriculture and Industry Development Bank of Cuba, which robbed peasants openly. At 12, I already had my present spelling because I had a sick cousin who was a subscriber of many good publishing houses. He would not recover. He was what they call then a lost TB case. And books kept landing on my lap. Books I wasn't supposed to read, and I acquired a sort of dispersed knowledge while reading philosophy, Sartre, Heidegger. How would I understand that? So I kept bothering my mother, who was a seamstress. Mom, what's the meaning of this and that? I'm telling you this because it was then I began wanting to be a writer. One day my mom said, enough of him. She brought a thick counting book and told me, here you'll write the words you read and don't know, and in the evening we'll play with the dictionary. We'll look them up and you'll write down what they mean. And so people will say, I have a such and such collection, and I will say I have a collection of words. I began loving and relating words. When I found, for instance, a de facto event, I would say it came from a de factography. So I began finding such things and playing with and relating words and being proud of my word collection. It was the time I read horrendous novels, the upheaval views, the European post-war mainly. Also, at home we were assiduous radio listeners. My mother was a communist. Her husband had been killed a few months before I was born. He was a political agitator and was buried under the sugarcane load. They smashed him.
Nada. Entonces a veces mami decía,
And my mother used to say, "You didn't know your father." And I would reply, "It is a pity he didn't know me. I should have been an unbearable kid." I spoke with the Camagüey pronunciation, well, children must pronounce well. And I had that knowledge others wouldn't have because my friends didn't have it. I guess that's when I got my urge to command the language. I wrote a novel I was lucky or smart enough to burn. It was horrible, very kitsch. I think I wrote it when I was 19. And I increasingly tried to write in the way I read things. That horrible novel I wrote resembled those I read.
You have a very, I think, peculiar story yourself because you've written a lot of books, but also you've written about other authors and about other books. And that's very interesting because you've even criticized and write articles about other books. And probably one of the most important things that you've written about the Cuban literature has to do with Lezama Lima. And probably our audience don't know who was him and why was he so important to Cuba and to Latin America. And briefly, I know that's hard for you, I would like to know why should we go to Lezama? What should we learn from him, even though he's hard to read?
I got to know Lezama very late. I was afraid of him because I tried to read his poetry and essay books, and it was beyond my scope of learning. But life has given me many opportunities. I saw Lezama first at the National Culture Council, now the Ministry of Culture, and I saw him daily and never mustered the courage to approach him until he published Paradiso. I had already read Lezama much, and I thought I understood him a little bit more, and I approached him. And he asked me, "Do you want to know Paradiso?" "Yes, I've got it here for you to sign it for me." "I'll try to understand it." "I can help you, but ask me very simple questions because I'm not a man who speaks much or in complex ways." And I thought, he's teasing me terribly. But I did it. I wrote a long text about Paradiso, which was later in the Órbita de Lezama Lima, and it was the text of my first book about him. I brought it to him with much apprehension. He was working then at the Literature and Linguistics Institute, and he told me to give him time to read it. He thought it was very good. He compared it even one by Severo Sarduy, and the great praise by Cortázar has already been published. He asked that it was included in the Órbita. I was walking as a dream along streets, feeling like Marta Valdez's song, "The world stops turvy." And then I was so emotional, particularly because of the way he was mistreated. He wrote to Reynaldo Gonzalez, who came in thinking of justice for my works, because everything said or written about Lezama was so offensive. He always struggled against forms of rejection because he was seclusive or a Catholic. Cuba is not fervently Catholic or the like, less so during the Republic. In the Republic, as in the colonial time, there was an appearance of Catholicism. There may be very devout people and so on, but generally our Catholicism has been a stage thing. And so they knew they were under harsh attacks, and I wrote that book to defend Lezama Lima. The important thing was he realized I was somebody who would stand up for him without entering his orbit. I had never thought or wished to be like Lezama Lima. My literary interests are completely different. I read American literature, and then the novel boom took place. I was quite abreast with new things because I worked at the Book Institute. Books came in, and it was I who sent them to the library. So I read them first one day, and then other people read it. I told Gabo, "I read your first book here." Most people got surprised at reading 100 Years of Solitude, and they went to see Gabo. The University of Veracruzana sent us the books, and I read them before others did. And so I realized the greatness of that literature, which was running counter. It followed no theory or style. I even have many doubts about what was called the orbit of Orígenes and the family of Orígenes and all that. As a Catholic, Lezama Lima was rather irreverent. You can read that at times in Paradiso, where there isn't a single priest described in good terms. There is in it the reverence he saw among the Cuban population. And also the sex issue. Evidently, Lezama's novel is written from a homosexual angle. And Lezama came up with the great novel of Latin America, which has so many homosexuality scenes and where sex is so preeminent, because he was always like that, going countercurrent. He got used to defending himself with whatever means he had, because culture and social ways were against him.
You've had yourself a novel that was needed to be defended, and even you removed a character, and then this character came back to this novel later on time. It's called Siempre la muerte, su paso breve, would be in English, always death and its brief path. Did you remove the character from it? And if you do it, why did you do it?
Mira,
Listen.
cuando yo esa novela
That novel won the Casa de las Américas Prize. It was the last days for sending pieces to the contest,
yo estaba con un amigo
and I had a friend who is very fast writer and makes no errors. I am very fast but make many errors. Suddenly, I learned homosexuals had been rounded up at the Capri Hotel,
empezaron
and homosexuality turned into a big problem, and my character was a homosexual in a township who, to some extent, culturally speaking, copied me, or I gave him my cultural traits not shared by people in that township. And this character's name is Silvestre, and that's the joke, because Silvestre means wild, and he grows everywhere like wild weeds, characters like that, and he can be seen everywhere in our countries. Silvestre had a problem, and he began having an unacceptable relationship with the Batista henchman in the novel. And Silvestre perfectly knew concerning his revolutionary friends what the situation was. He cooperated and so on, but Silvestre, well, had this affair. Imagine publishing such a character. The novel would not be even read. So I hung the novel pages with clippers and cut off the Silvestre parts and put them inside a big yellow envelope. Silvestre is in the first version, but how he develops as a character does not. Silvestre is the man who at the end justly executes the killer.
But he comes back. He came back in the second edition.
Pero claro, yo lo quiero aquí.
Of course, I want him here.
But you've received a national prize for being a writer. You've been one of the book fairs was dedicated to you. That looks like has changed in a way.
Pues claro que
Of
son
course,
cambios.
those are changes. But you should remember that Virgilio Piñera and Lezama Lima died without being acknowledged, and that talking about a great 5-year period is inaccurate.
Y piensa que estas
These individual acknowledgments are something we appreciate, and I am with my hands on again as when I was 27, or at least that's how I see myself, working on a literary magazine for the country's culture, doing this and doing that and so on.
etcétera.
I've always worked for my country's culture. I've always felt I am part of my country. Those periods of stoppages and detachments have always seemed artificial to me.
And you're talking about La Siempre Viva, Always Alive would be the name in English, and which is a magazine about writers and literature. But if there is an experience which shows that what you're saying is the one that you had with Silvio Rodriguez when he decided, a very famous musician here in Cuba, when he decided to go to prisons to take culture, music, books to prisoners in Cuba, to people who are who committed some kind of felony and they are imprisoned. And you went with him, and you made this tour through a lot of prisons, and it's a way of that. Why did you do it?
¿Quiénes
Who are
están
those
aquí?
doing time? Cubans. Who are
¿Quiénes
those
están
doing
aquí?
time?
Mayoría negra.
Black people mostly.
Hay
There are
muchas
many situations
situaciones que
related
tienen
to my convictions
convicciones
about Cuba
sobre
that
Cuba.
came into play.
Se agruparon en eso. Cuando Silvio
When Silvio Rodriguez called me,
tiene que
he
haberse
must have been
asombrado.
surprised.
Ya
I
tengo
said,
el
I've already
cepillo
got
de
my
dientes
toothbrush in my pocket. Let's go.
Y yo era, yo
I
no
was
sabía
already
qué
a
era.
little old,
Pero es que lo he hecho
but
siempre.
that's what I have always
Cuando
done. When
se me
doors
cierran
are
las
closed
puertas,
to
yo
me,
busco
I
cuál
always
es el
look for
postigo.
the one I can open.
Y en eso, en el caso de la...
Osmani Cienfuegos invited me to share a wonderful experience in Las Terrazas. It was not called Las Terrazas, it was a wild place where one of Cuba's most beautiful townships was built.
¿A dónde voy? Voy para
So I
allá.
went and stayed there, and a book called Conversation at Las Terrazas was published because I turned everything into books that have that virtue or defect, right? And it describes those peasants, some of whom have even been moved from their towns and settled in other places, or those who grew up and lived there and have only been charcoal makers. Children there didn't have many things. It would be joy for them, so I fell in love with the project.
Esta es una realidad que está en mi...
That is something which is part of me. I don't have to make an effort or force myself or the like. I feel that way because I was born in a poor neighborhood called Chinchacoja, almost an object of mockery in Ciego de Ávila, and I am that kid who sold mangoes. It is no effort for me. I am not forcing myself. Now I am slowing down. I am a man with gout and I am old, but I won't quit. I won't be like ballerinas who want to die on stage. No, but I want to be useful till the end. To be useful. To me, that's doing as usual. I don't have to make an effort. There are people who have sudden improvisations. They go political, and they haven't given a thought of policies. They never talked about politics before, and now they are getting a halo with it. It happens. It has happened always in the history of Cuba. But the thing is, history evolves sometimes such a way that it goes back.
So, Reynaldo, what do you think about the new writers, the people, the young people that are writing right now? How do you think is the health of the Cuban literature?
Listen, supposedly, at these times of change and of a crisis, and as every crisis brings a morality crisis, something which is very old and is known, this would be a great time for good literature. That's how I see it. Our classics did not write in happiness or with comfort. The Spanish language is full, from Quevedo and Cervantes to all those who came later, of people who had problems and wrote. And they just wrote about problems or sought evasion, or they wrote love poems which were also seen as an evasion, and so on. But generally, even such evasion shows the times. Nobody escapes his time. Everybody shows it at some point. And this would be a splendid time to write with a greater sense of freedom. A greater sense of freedom nobody gives to or takes away from you, but you take it. Because nobody was ever commissioned, not even during that terrible period, with writing this or that. Or if somebody was so, it wasn't me. Right? And there was a literature that was more or less worth defending. I think there is stagnation, there is repetition. Some people are, that this very book being written by three persons, they don't explore new avenues, or they emulate what is not so easy to emulate. They don't seem to know their trade, less so their time.
que viven
and the
la
need
necesidad de reflejar
to describe it and to work,
Hay
etc.
gente como yo
There are people like
que
me
estudia una
who
lengua
set for themselves a task
que es más bien
which is more
educativa,
educative,
que es más bien
and it's
buscando las
finding the
raíces
roots
del
of
problema,
problems.
porque cuando
Because
escribes
when
sobre
you
el siglo
write
XIX,
about the
escribes
19th
sobre el
century, you're
XX,
writing about the 20th and
no te
21st centuries.
olvides,
Don't forget that.
no te olvides, es
It
así.
is so.
Pero hay
But
gente que nace,
I don't know why
no sé por
there are
qué,
people
con
in
una
literary
especie
movements
de
who are born with a sort
talento
of
en
relentis,
movimientos literarios,
a short
en un
stepping,
paso corto, y no
and
hay
they don't
la
have the
potencia
power
de la
that props
creatividad que
you
te impulsa
onward
y que
and
no
leaves
te
you
deja
with no
hacer
choice
otra cosa
but
que
to work.
trabajar. O
Or to
trabajar, pero
work,
ya con una
but
idea.
having an
Yo
idea
estoy viendo
already.
esto y estoy
I'm
tratando
seeing
de que
this
a
and
través
I'm
de mi
trying that
revista,
through my
La
magazine,
Siempre
La
Viva,
Siempre
darle
Viva,
información
illustrate
histórica.
readers.
No le
I
puse
didn't call it La
nombre
Siempre Viva just
porque
because,
en este
as
lugar,
in this place, talking about
hablar de
La
La Siempre
Siempre
Viva es
Viva
hablar
is talking about
del hombre que
a
fue
man called
Bachiller
Bachiller Morales,
el gran
Cuba's greatest
bibliógrafo de Cuba.
bibliographer.
Y le puse
I
ese
gave it
nombre para esto. Y es para llegar
that
no a los
name for
viejos.
this reason, not to reach
A mí me
out to
interesa
the
que
old
el pueblo
timers.
conozca
I
su
want
pasado,
youth to know
que
their
esté
roots and be
actualizado.
familiar with the present.
Estos son los
These
modos
are the reasons
de
for
hacer una revista
publishing
ahora. Y una revista
a
literaria.
magazine
Que
now,
no
a
sea una
literary
revista donde
magazine, not a
empiece
magazine
un
which
falso
initiates
politicismo
phony
o un
politicking or
falso
philosophy that
filosofismo
hinders
que empiece a
dialogue.
entorpecer
It is a
es
literary
una revista
magazine,
literaria.
and I'm
Y estoy
inviting them
invitando a
to
leer.
read it.
And you're inviting to read, and that's very good, Reynaldo. But also, it's like I think there's a debate here in Cuba about that young people don't read enough because of the uses of the technology devices and other kinds of problems. But there is a perception that it is not nationally only, it's internationally. But what do you think it should be done in order to go back to literature, to books, even though they could be digital books, in order for young people to read more?
Listen, I think young university students are doing their mass reading, but there's already a desire also. Yet I think that if youths and adults alike cannot expect to find new things in books, well, here the same classics are published every year, the same ones. Since the Huracan collection, every year we are reprinting those books as if they were immovable. A young man is not going to read The Hound of the Baskervilles again, and people are not going to read again The Palm Tree Wine Drinker, which is a remarkable book. People are not expecting surprises. That's a fact. Our catalogs are not attractive.
Do you think, and now we live in a country with a lot of well-educated people, and absolutely everybody knows how to read and write, and that's a consequence of what happened in 1959, even though you have pain because of things that happened in between. I don't know pretty much where the question should go about, but do you have any regrets? Do you think in general the history that you've lived is a good history for your own country?
Well, what has happened is really what has not happened in other countries around ours. What has been achieved, which is remarkable, extraordinary, is our history too. I see myself as part of all that has been done, the good and bad things. There are times I really want to say, you and ourselves, to set things straight, because some people believe that by taking for themselves the good things and achievements of the revolution, they don't have to do better. They don't have to analyze what they have done. There is no self-criticism. And it is good telling them, wait people, you haven't done everything right, and so on. Perhaps I myself didn't do everything right, and I think that in the personal case of an intellectual who has gone through what I have gone through, it is proof of strength. You would not see in those who repeated slogans and mottos and wanted to turn art into a sort of moldable bread, and who showed no respect. And that may happen to a politician, a famous writer who earns a lot or makes it, or even to a ballerina. It may be anybody's case. This should be approached again as a whole. That's very good. As Virgilio Piñera put it, to make a full stop. and see how far I have gone, where I went to, what I'm doing, and above all, where I am heading to. I believe it keeps me alive. It keeps me supposedly young. It keeps me rather active, and I have refused to die. Blows were harsh, but they didn't kill me. There's that quotation, the dead you kill are in good health. That's the way it is.
Thank you very much, Reynaldo. It's been such a pleasure to meet you and to hear everything from you.
Thank you so
Gracias.
much.